Hey, Joe Gilder here from Home Studio Corner. We're going to talk about EQ this week. I've got a two-part video series that's going to dive into the basics of EQ. Now, if you've been mixing and recording for a while and you think, oh, I'm beyond basics in EQ, I would argue stick around. You might hear something that'll help you get better or faster results on your next song. Ultimately, all we do in the studio is fundamental stuff. Yes, we may have tons of variations within those fundamentals, but getting a good grasp on the fundamentals and revisiting it from time to time can be super helpful. For example, I like to read business books, and I will read them once and then I'll go back and read them again in a year or so. There are some books I've read dozens of times because I get something new out of them every time. So it's helpful to sit down and talk about something as simple as EQ because we might learn something new. I didn't mean to make that rhyme. This video will be pretty different from what you're probably expecting from an intro to EQ video, but we're going to talk about how to think about EQ. What is its purpose and what goal are we trying to achieve? I've got three words I want to use to help us think through that: balance, sculpt, and feature. Let's dive in. This may sound weird, but the word balance is one of my favorite words when it comes to talking about music. Why? Because balance is what it's all about. If you're playing an acoustic show, so let's say it's a house show, no PA system, it's just you and your guitar and a room full of people just sitting there watching you. What do you have to do? You have to balance your voice with the guitar. If you just wail on that guitar and then you sing really softly, it's not going to be in balance and people aren't going to really enjoy it because they can't hear you singing. Likewise, if you scream and they can barely hear the guitar, same thing. And it applies to all different expressions of music. Orchestras need to be in balance. The double basses don't need to be 3 times as loud as the violins. That's usually why you only have a couple of double basses and a whole bunch of violins, so that they're balanced. If you're a drummer, you want to have balance in the way that you play. You don't want the hi-hat to be ridiculously loud to where we can't really hear the snare because you're just wailing on the hi-hat. And it's no different with EQ. EQ is another way to achieve balance in your mixes. If these tracks are too loud and these are too soft, we use the volumes to balance them out. But within a specific track or group of tracks, we might use EQ to balance out the frequencies. If a track is perfectly balanced, you don't need EQ. But if there are certain frequencies that need to be more even with other frequencies in that track, EQ comes to the rescue. This doesn't mean you want to use a frequency graph and look at the frequencies and make them all completely flat. Flat isn't necessarily balanced. What you want to do is make sure the lows, mids, and highs all complement one another and that the track itself works well with everything else in the session. You might hear me say something like, okay, let's listen to this, let's get rid of that frequency. What I usually mean when I say that isn't to get rid of it entirely, but that particular frequency is standing out. If everybody's right here, kind of nice and balanced, and one frequency is jumping up, we're going to say, hey, you come back down and be more in balance with everything else in the track. That's what we're trying to accomplish. The second word I want to talk about when we're dealing with EQ is sculpt. I love this analogy of a sculptor. I don't sculpt. I don't know if I know anyone who does, but I have such admiration for someone who can take a block of marble and then chip away everything that doesn't look like it needs to look until they get a statue. Sculpting is a big part of what we do in the studio with EQ. We are taking a raw track and we are removing things that don't need to be there. So if there are certain resonances that are really sticking up and standing out, we're going to tame them down to get them in balance. We're going to take away things that aren't helping us get the sound that we want or aren't helping this track sit well in the mix with everything else. A lot of people think of EQ as a tool primarily used for boosting frequencies, and we'll get to that in a second. But before I'm thinking about boosting, oftentimes I'm thinking about what doesn't belong here when I listen to this, and how can I take away the things that don't belong to leave room for the things that do. The third word I want to talk about when we think about EQ is feature. Another word you could use is boost. While I'm a big fan of subtractive EQ, where you're taking away things that aren't working, I am as much of a fan, especially in the last few years, of boosting the things that are working. For example, man, that kick drum sounds great, but it could use a little more low-end thump to really get it where I want it to be. EQ boost to the rescue. Her vocal sounds beautiful, but it could use just a little more air in the top end to take it over the top. EQ boost to the rescue. At various times in the last 10 years, I've probably said something like, boosting is bad, only use cuts for EQ. It's a little stupid. Boosting is a part of what an EQ can do, and sometimes it is absolutely the right choice. Sometimes cuts are the right choice. Oftentimes, both are the right choice. To use our kick drum example, I might want to boost down here at 80 hertz and then cut here at 400 hertz, and that creates the sound that I want. we're getting a nice, balanced, awesome sound. Okay, take a sticky note, write those 3 words down, slap it on your computer monitor. Next time you go to mix a song and you put EQ up there, I want you to quickly think about balance, sculpt, feature. You're going to be doing one or all of those things every time you use an EQ, and if you're in that headspace, you're going to get good results. Now, you've made it this far in the video. You probably love mixing as much as I do. If you haven't checked out my free 5-step mix guide, go to 5stepmix.com, enter your email, you'll get a free download. It walks you through my mixing process from start to finish. Really helpful, especially if you sometimes feel lost when you're working on a mix and you don't know what to do next. This guide will help you. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.